Uh,
Oh, hey,
Here we are.
that crept up on us.
Yeah. Well, at least we're all here today. Hey, Chris Anderson, calling Chris Anderson
Chris,
where are you?
I am still in Windsor, at least for now, and
You
you
haven't
are
kicked me
still
out
in
yet?
Chicago.
The,
Well, no, I'm sure I'll be going somewhere soon. I just don't
the
know
king
where yet.
hasn't said, away with him.
No, but I did go to his church this morning, so he
Oh,
wasn't there, but he was nice.
oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Welcome everybody to History Happy Hour. Thanks to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for helping bring you this show. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at stephenambrosetours.com. And Chris, whether you're watching live, watching on replay, could be listening on the HHH
Podcast.
Yes, we're glad you're here. And today we're going to be talking with Martin King about the Battle of the Bulge and especially the fighting in Bastogne. Let us know what you're drinking. If you're drinking, you should be drinking.
It should be right.
And Chris, we want to thank everybody who supports us on Patreon, especially our top shelf patrons. And I just want to say that at 2:06 a.m.,
Yes.
Bill Barrett, okay, Garrett, Bill Garrett. He was a $10 sponsor, but he upped his sponsoring category.
He was having a wild night, and he just couldn't control himself.
Become a top shelf patron, and I mean, immediately our team swung into action.
Yes, they
to
did.
Make sure that our graphic would have Bill here. So, Bill, thank you so much. If you're on the show, give us a wave. Tell us what you're drinking.
Could you put that back? I had a question though.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Who's Mr. M. Ipsum?
Ipsum, yeah, that's what we call an error. Okay.
I was curious.
Or actually, I think it's the bottle. The bottle has gotten drunk.
Oh,
it's now talking in dummy type there. So,
okay.
I imagine that we can can we get the graphics team to
fix
that before the next show? I think we'll manage to do that. Chris, do we have anybody watching?
We do.
Or what are they telling us?
Well, Tony Coulter, and it's really good to see Tony with us again. And we're going to ask. He wants to know the difference between rescued and relieved. He thinks
okay. Yes, we'll get into that or not.
And Lizzie Borden, of course, from London, and Wally Morrison, Brett from Toronto. So it's good to have some Canadians with us. And
fantastic. I see Nancy Nallance, Stephen Esty, and Ann Ballard Bryan from snowy Little Rock. It is snowing every effing place in the United States except where I live, where I want snow. I don't know what's going on there. But Chris, I mean, they're all here probably not to see us, but to see us talking with our guest and subjecting him to the Inquisition that we're used to doing. So give me a cue and we'll get to it.
Oh, yeah. The bar is open.
The bar is open. Chris Martin King is a Scottish historian who lives in Belgium and writes mostly about Americans. So that's three things there altogether. Okay. And I first met him about 10 years ago when he assisted Marilyn and I on the Bastogne portion of our first Ghost Army tour. Mm-hmm. And we worked together on several other trips. We traded promotional blurbs for books. Martin has written a number of books and done a lot of speaking in Europe in the U.S. about World War II. His latest, written with several other folks, is called The Eagles of Bastone, The Untold Story of the Heroic Defense of a City Under Siege. Martin, welcome to History Happy Hour.
Hey, welcome, Rick. Welcome, Chris. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
I in honor of you being in Belgium, I have a nice Chimay.
Oh, that's a good one. I've been there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Chris,
I would join this order.
What do you have, Mr. Anderson?
I have my Glen Turret 12.
That's a very nice one. Absolutely.
And how about you?
I'm on Highland Park.
Highland Park, excellent.
This comes from the Orkneys above Scotland. And
we were just in the Orkneys in August, Marilyn and I, so loved it. But we did buy some scotch there, but we did not get to go to a distillery there. So
how did you miss a distillery? You can't swing a cat and hit a distillery.
Well, we managed to go to a distillery. We went to the Glenkinchie distillery
Oh,
outside of
Glenkinchie's good.
Edinburgh. Yeah, that's fun.
Okay, well,
No,
that's
that's a
useful.
very good one.
Yeah.
It's a lowland one, but you know, I mean, thing is, I've not actually. I've been drinking for about 40 years, I think. But I do. You know, Scots people aren't drunks by nature because we don't like paying for it. But that's the fastest way to empty a Scottish pub is to go in and buy everybody a drink. Right, done.
Because then they don't want to buy
They
you
don't
one.
want to pay your own bag. No, we do enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm sure that we could probably spend the whole show talking about Scotch, and
We could indeed,
maybe
and
we
I'd be
should.
perfectly happy to do that. But no, listen, your friends, your fans have called in to hear about the book, so you know I'm perfectly happy to talk. Military history is my thing, Rick. You know.
Well, look, there have been many books written about the Battle of the Bulge, many books written about
Precisely.
Bastogne, many
Yeah.
written about the 101st Airborne. But
That's
your
true.
book says it has the unknown story. And I'm just thinking, Martin, what could possibly still be unknown about this story?
Well, to make a long story short, the official historian of the 101st Airborne was a guy called Captain Pat Sealing, who's currently serving with the United States Army. And he said, Martin, I found a load of these files, which you're not going to believe. And I had no plans to make a book about the 101st Airborne, although I had been there. And I had a contact with a few of the guys from Band of Brothers. Not just the actors, I mean the actual protagonists as well. And he said, yeah, this is going to change. This is going to be a game changer. And I wasn't entirely convinced, to tell you the truth, about that. I thought, well, yeah, it's going to be good, but it did turn out to be a game changer because now we've been able to include people. You see, the thing is that they were not all heroes. The majority were, but there were some detractors, and I think we need to hear about them too. So we need to give a human visage to the 101st Airborne. They were great. They were indomitable. They were tough, courageous, but there were a few there who weren't too happy with the arrangement, and one even. He was going to shoot his sergeant, but he decided to punch him out instead. And so, what we've given you here is the nuts and bolts. So, what happens is with a history book is basically what happens is that people say, right, the general says this, that general says that. They move there, they move over there. Well, I thought, no, I'm going to do this completely differently. I'm going to really do this from the ground up, from the guys who were on a pass in Paris. And they got the call to come back to base as soon as possible. And I met some of them. You see, that adds poignancy to me, and I'm sure to you, Rick, and you, Chris, when you actually meet these veterans and you hear what they have to say for themselves. It changes the rules completely, because then you're not talking to guys who are film stars or pop stars, talking to real normal human beings who were in this abnormal situation. And so I'd started meeting these guys already on 30 years ago, in fact, when I first met Bill Guarnier and Babe Heffron when they came to Bastogne. And I am not afraid of bad language. I don't use it much myself unless I'm trying to drink. But this guy, he used bad language, and he wasn't the only one. He really was quite fruity with his language, and he swore quite a lot. And I just found it hugely entertaining. I was with him when they filmed in Bulge for French TV. It was French TV and Luxembourg TV together, and Babe was warning him vociferously, do not swear, Bill. Oh, don't worry about it. And he's walking around, and he didn't wear a prosthetic leg. He just had the crutches. But he chose his point perfectly. He waited until both cameras were looking at him in the middle of Boisjac, and then he shouted at the top of his head, If any of you effers finds a leg, it's mine. And the
But
mayor
yet
of
another, Martin, I've heard you tell this story before. There's another word you left out of there. So give us, no,
Hey,
give us the
I
whole
did.
thing. Give us the whole
All
thing.
right, he said, if any of you fuckers find a leg, it's mine. All right. And the mayor of Bastogne, who I know very well, he likes me when he likes me, and he doesn't like me when he doesn't like me. He's a very strange guy, but it's fine, you know. And he said, "What is this, Martin Fouquet?" I said, "That's you." Oh, right, okay. He said, "He's not bad." I said, no, of course not. And he was perfectly happy. But I met a few of them. Joe Toy, he made his way to Bastogne. Dick Winters didn't, but I actually went to his office in Hershey because his best friend, he just passed, and his best friend, Bill Jackson of the Sun Times in Hershey, said, "Martin, look, we've moved his whole office to the Education and Heritage Center in Carlisle." I said, "Yeah, well, I'll sign my books there." And they'd even moved the wallpaper, right? Everything. And on his office desk, on Dick Winters' office desk, was his copy of Band of Brothers. So, being an inquisitive man, I opened it and I looked, oh, wow. Every single margin in that book had comments and remarks and observations on it. And I assumed from Bill Jackson that actually Dick Winters wasn't too happy with the well, not necessarily the status, but the fact that he was getting attention. He didn't like that at all. Apparently, he was a very quiet, unassuming man. But I actually saw the book, and I didn't meet Dick himself, but I still think it's quite a legacy. I mean, what they did was, I mean, people are critical of Ambrose. Mostly historians, because we're jealous that he sold so many. But you know, the main thing about Ambrose is that he actually opened up World War II to a bigger generation. And that is undeniable. Before Band of Brothers and after Band of Brothers. Before Band of Brothers, there was modicum. There was some interest, you know. After Band of Brothers, bang, you know. And so he did some good, you know. I mean, I can't criticize the guy, although he did not know the name of the black nurse in Band of Brothers. And I tried for weeks to find out who that was. And it wasn't him who found it out. It was actually a co-writer of mine, Mike Collins, in Massachusetts. He discovered what her name was, and then I picked it up from there. So yeah, that's two stories for one there.
So
Yeah.
Martin,
Yeah.
since you decided to write a book about about Bastogne, and as Rick said, so much has already been written about it. What do you think are some of the misperceptions people have about the battle or about the campaign that warrant another book? What is it that people don't know or get wrong or misunderstand?
I think the most important thing, Chris, is that there was never any given time during the siege of Bastogne that they were in any danger of being taken over. They got surrounded, but they were never in any danger of seceding Bastogne to the Germans. It was never going to happen. Primarily because the numbers of the opposing forces were roughly the same. And if you read, military books on strategy, tactics, they'll probably tell you that defense is better than offense. But in the case of Bastogne, it really was better than offense. They never showed any danger of, and I think, which is also primarily important, the morale factor among the GIs was pretty amazing, actually, considering. And the Germans, there's a lot of misconceptions. So one, the Germans could never have taken Bastogne, ever. Two, that Manteuffel had no knowledge of the surrender ultimatum. He actually visited that office that day, so he knew that there was going to be a surrender ultimatum made.
You're
It
talking
wasn't going
about
to be made.
General Manteuffel, the German general.
Manteuffel, yeah,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
excuse me. Yeah, it's Manteuffel, General Hasso von Manteuffel. He knew that there was going to be a surrender ultimatum, but he knew it wouldn't be made in his name to keep him comfortably out of the firing line, for want of a better expression. But no, he knew about it, and it was Bayerlein and Cocotte who said, "Yeah, come on, let's do this. Let's have a go." It was a gamble. It was a very obvious gamble, and it wasn't ever going to work. And especially not. I mean, if you go up against someone like Tony McAuliffe. McAuliffe was an acting general at the time. He didn't really have the job, but he was the best man for the job. He was a West Pointer. He was not a profane man. I mean, that's one thing I've heard from all the soldiers who knew him. He never swore, and the most outrageous thing he would say was nuts. And apparently that was a standard riposte to every situation, if something was not going good, nuts, he used to say that a lot. And so, yeah, I think he was a perfect man for the job. He had a cool head. He had a great staff around him. I met one or two of them, and it's for me, it was a foregone conclusion, the whole situation. And why we're saying, we could have lost that, we could have done this, absolutely, but it was not going to happen in Bastogne in 44 and 45 of World War II.
Well, let me ask you a question about one particular part of the Battle of Bastogne, which is the Battle of Noville. And I'm throwing up this map, which I want to say is not from your book, and it may be so small that it's hard for you to read. But Noville is the town with all the arrows around it, about halfway up the map. The Americans send in an armored team under Major William Desaubry. He's enforced on the morning. I think he gets in on the 18th. He's enforced in the morning of the 19th by the 1st Battalion of the 506th under Lieutenant Colonel Leprade. And that afternoon, the afternoon of the 19th, the Germans have tanks. As you see, the arrows there on three sides of Noville. Yeah. Their artillery kills Leprade. It badly wounds Desaubry, who ends up being taken to the field hospital, and then he's captured and spends the rest of the war as a prisoner of war before rising to become a general in the U.S. Army. Anyway, they kill Leprade, they maim Desaubry. And yet one of the things that I was interested in, when I tell this story to people in Noville, I've kind of said, there it is, in the battle, and the Americans retreat and blah, blah, blah. But it's 2 days. They're wounded and killed on the 19th. It is the 21st before the Americans retreat. And so what I want to, and which gives the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment a chance to dig in south of Foy. So how do the folks from the 10th Armored, which is there, and the 101st, which is there, how do they hang on against all this German armored power?
That's a great question. The thing is that, well, first and foremost, neither side knew the side of the opposing side because of the fog situation. I remember one young black nurse saying that the fog was coupé en couteau. She said you could cut the fog like a knife. You never knew the entire size of the force opposing you. So that was a problem. Now, there was an additional problem between Desaubry and what was it?
Leprade?
Leprade, yeah, Lieutenant Leprade. There was an additional problem between them two about who was going to be actually in command. Because McAuliffe had said, Leprade is going to be in command. There's no discussion about it, but Desaubry didn't agree with that. Now there was one about an hour on the afternoon of the 19th when the skies cleared a little bit, only a little bit, but it still wasn't enough to, and the proof of this will come. it still wasn't enough to give them an accurate idea of the opposing force. And the reason why they didn't understand that there was a big enough force there was that they were actually planning a counterattack from that ridge on the Vaux Ridge to the top of Noville onto the right. They were going to attack the Germans from there. Now, surely, if they would have contemplated the prospect, they would have been able to see that there were actually two divisions in their direction, but one of them had actually taken off to the east. That was the 116th German division, the Windhund, the Greyhound division. They'd taken off east, and the actual importance of Bastogne wasn't high on Manteuffel's agenda. He regarded it as a problem, but he didn't regard it as a place that had to be taken. So he kept the pressure up, and they actually had to retreat. But the problem was that when they retreated back to Bastogne, the 28th Volksgrenadier came around behind them and actually almost tried to cut them off, but they managed to get through. And it was really running the gauntlet.
Well, they cut off the highway, right? And I suspect a lot of people in our audience here have been there, either with Chris or with me.
Yeah.
They cut off the highway around Foy, and so the folks who are in Noville can't get back, so they have to send some other folks out from the 101st to reopen the highway so that they can retreat and get back in within the American lines. And again, it amazes me that they managed to hold off the Germans for so long.
Yeah, again, that says a lot about first of all, how they worked together. You had three teams there. You had Disobry, you had O'Hara, you had Cherry in the center. Each one was reinforced by 101st Airborne paratroopers. And the working arrangement, the working organization between the two was just amazing. And for instance, the total of men that the 10th Armored Division had with them was 2,700 at the time. And that's no way near enough to do the job that they were planning to do. But when you put the two together, they just worked incredibly well together. There was a great esprit de corps. Now, I've heard it from both sides, from the 10th Armored Division. So Mike Collins, who wrote Tigers of Bastogne with me, his grandfather was with the 10th Armored, and he was telling stories. And then Mike became the president of the 10th Armored Division Association. So we got more depositions from people telling us what happened to them. So yeah, it's not really that strange. I think that we got so much information that they worked so well together. There was generally, you see, that if you look at the German soldier in December 1944, he's basically the antithesis of the American soldier. The American soldier, he can't do anything below regimental level, really. I mean, all right, there are some minor exceptions, but normally they wouldn't be able to do anything autonomously. They need to get written orders to do what they have to do.
The Germans.
Yeah, and the Americans are the antithesis of that. They can improvise, but this capacity to improvise gave them the edge, particularly in an area like Bastogne. It gave them a really good edge, and so for me, I think it was never going to be anything else but a huge American victory.
Well, Martin, one of the things that I'd like you to maybe elaborate a little bit more on, you've talked about the 10th Armored a bit, and you go into greater detail in the book, but maybe you can explain a little bit more about some of the other units that are there, because obviously the 101st isn't actually all in, it's only part of the defense.
Absolutely.
There are lots of other units there, and maybe you can talk about some of these other components of this, and I'm going to see if you bring up a couple of units that I'm interested in. If not, I'll follow up.
Test question.
This is a test question, yeah. But talk about some of the rest of the defense there.
Well, the 969 artillery unit, they were a black artillery unit in Bastogne, and they were a component of the 333rd, who were a black African American artillery unit who'd been, well, some of them had been massacred out on the Snake Eifel.
Folks, yeah.
It was in the east of Belgium, in an area close to the Snake Eifel. So you had the 969th, you had the various TDs, the tank destroyers. They were invaluable. The tank destroyers were invaluable to the 101st Airborne.
Can you explain? I'm interrupting. Just being that annoying moderator who asks you to explain every reference.
Fire away, Rick. Fire away.
But I know half the audience knows exactly what a tank destroyer is. Half the audience is, what the hell is a tank destroyer? So
right,
like an M10? What the hell is a tank destroyer?
Well, an M10 is an Achilles in British. It's the same thing as an Achilles, and what you have basically with a tank destroyer, it's an open turret, right? Bloody cold in winter.
Right. But, so it's basically a mobile artillery piece.
It's a mobile artillery piece. It's no different. Well, yeah, I would say that, yes, it is different. It is more of a tank than an artillery piece, because if you look at an artillery piece like a Jagd Tiger or a Jagd Panther, that really is a cannon stuck in a big metal hulk, and the whole thing turns around. But with the M10, you can turn the turret perfectly well. But it is cold. The thing is, you can only run them for 2 hours, and then you have to stop and refuel. They are limited, but the time that they're engaged, the people who were using them properly and were saying, hey, come on, these are the guys that do the job. When the Christmas Day attack went in towards Chateau Rolly, I stayed there last year. Well, the place is great, but I'm just not great. And when the Germans attacked them on Christmas Day, they had tank destroyers waiting for them to cut them off. So as good as these German tanks were, and they were good, I mean, some of them even had night vision back then, but they were not up to the speed and the efficiency of the tank destroyer. They were a tank destroyer was faster, it was more accurate, and so we had a lot going for us, the British and the Americans, with these TDs, with these tank destroyers. Wonderful. Look one up, M10 or Achilles, and you'll notice there's no lid on it.
Right, it's open.
Ooh.
Chris, I jumped in there, so I can go or you can go. It's your choice.
It's the field is
right
yours,
away.
Rick.
Well, okay. So, Martin, one of the things your book reminds me of, and actually, let me start by just first of all saying that we are chatting today with Martin King, who is the author of the book, The Eagles of Bastone, the untold story of the heroic defense of a city under siege. And he's not the only author, because he also lists Michael Collins, Patrick Sealing, and Ronald Stassen with him. And we know some of those folks. One of the things that your book reminds me of is that no matter how big the battle, it always seems to come down to stories of a few soldiers on each side fighting in a crossroads or a woods or on a hill.
Yeah.
And it's thousands of confrontations like that make up the big battle and make it so hard to describe a big battle in a coherent sense. So is there a small scale confrontation that for you really represents the Battle of Bastogne?
Yeah, there is. There are a couple, but the one that springs to mind was the arrival of the 506th at Bastogne. Now, there'd been 13 and a half hours in the back of these tank transporter trucks, which were not comfortable. There were no tops on these things, and they went straight into action as soon as they arrived. And, I had a similar experience with a Hollywood film crew. I was making a TV series called Greatest Tank Battle some years ago. And I remember meeting the guys in Brussels airport, and they looked like slobs. They looked like refugees from Woodstock. Oh my God, this is not going to work out. It's going to be terrible. And as soon as the director, Mariam Jabrani, a wonderful person that she was, as soon as she said action, I'd never seen a team go to work like this. And they all just fell perfectly into place. And I think that must have been a similar kind of situation where, you see these frozen guys literally limbering off this tank transporter, trying to bum equipment from people. Then all of a sudden, bang, the Germans attack. They've got no choice but to get stuck in. And I think that kind of epitomized it for me, because these guys were prepared to do that as soon as they got to where they needed to be. So what we're dealing with here is, I mean, like for infantry, as great as they were, they would often have time to get into position and, you know, set up the battlefield, whatever. But these guys were just straight in there. They were straight in, and I think that is amazing. That tells you something about the character of these people and the resilience, the determination. So I've always admired that particular story. And there was one guy, a medic, who I did get to know quite well. He was sitting in a room in the Heinz barracks, which you know too well, Rick, the headquarters of McAuliffe's. McAuliffe's, yeah. So he was sitting in a room there. There was a patient just coming in, and just as this patient came in, a German. It was a 75 shell. He claimed it was an 88, but I'm pretty sure there were no 88s in the area, in the vicinity at that time. But it was 75, came through the wall and went out the other wall, and he just carried on treating the patient. Now, that takes nerve, you know? And these are the kind of things you see. What I've tried to do with all the books, I mean, I've written 16 so far, but what I've tried to do with all the books is let the soldiers tell their story, as you've done with Ghost Army, Rick. You know, let them tell their piece, let them get it off the chest, let them talk about it. And I've tried to do exactly the same thing, you know. And of course, you've got to add the necessary. What I do, every book of mine, every chapter has a not strict, but I'd say quite a stringent visual order. You sort of start off with the soldiers. What was the situation on the day at the time? Then you get the soldier to tell you how he experienced it. Then you got the global situation. So what was the situation? So where were the Germans and where were the Americans? And then, you know, how did that day play out? And so you've got these four elements, which I try to introduce to every chapter. So you're getting the whole story, and not just this harumphing of a general saying what he thinks should have happened. You know, I don't like that kind of speculation. I prefer to stick with the soldier who said, you know, we were down to a last cookie or something, or we're down to a last bullet. I prefer this real human stories. And that's, I think, what basically comes out of the pages that I write and the pages that I go back to read, in fact.
So, Martin, you've been talking, you know, we talked quite a bit about the Americans, but in your book, you go into some detail about the Germans. And one of the things that I guess kind of struck me is, of course, in American histories of the battle, Bastogne looms pretty large. But the Germans have a somewhat different view of the city, and that view changes over the course of the fight. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how do the Germans perceive Bastogne, and then how is that changing, and how are they trying to tackle this problem?
Well, they never tried to tackle it, Chris. What it was, basically, the Bastogne is known as Bastenack to the Germans, Bastenaken to the Dutch speakers. They basically never tried to change the perception. I mean, I met two Germans a couple of years ago who met up with two American veterans, and they were perfectly amiable with each other, friendly and everything. But, you know, to get inside a German's mind, I in my career have gone after Germans, and some of them top ranking Germans in the 1st Division SS. When I did my first book, Voices of the Bulge, I went after the guy who gave the order to shoot the American prisoners in Malmedy. His name was George Siptrot. and I'd heard that he attended meetings in Germany, in various places. And so I managed to, after about a year, I managed to get in touch with someone who had contact with him. And I managed to get an invitation to this meeting of the 1st Division SS in that particular room. There were a few still living. He was 92, I believe, 91 or 92 at the time. And I went straight up to him. I said, "Did you give the order, George Sipter, did you give the order to shoot the American prisoners?" Now, before I'd been to see him, I'd been to see a guy called Ted Pauluch in Philadelphia. Ted, big Eagles fan, great guy, wonderful man. He was in the front line when the two guards began shooting. And now you see, now you're starting to get a different perspective of Germans. You've got Germans, Wehrmacht. Well, that time it wasn't Wehrmacht anymore. It was Volksgrenadier. And the other side was the SS. Now, the SS in 1944 was not the SS that had been in 1941, 42, 43 even. And they'd started replacing with SS soldiers with Eastern territories. So you had Romanians, Hungarians, you had even had Scandinavians. And these two guys, these two Romanians, they were actually guarding the guys from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. They were guarding them. And Siptrot came past in a sidecar. And the Romanians asked, was machen wir mit den Gefangenen in Bad German? And he said, mach alle kaputt. And he drove on. You see, that was nothing to him. That was nothing. He drove on. He gave a gesture and he drove on, but the gesture meant kill a lot of them, And then the Romanians started firing, and then a half track came around the corner and that started firing. You see, that was not the same war they fought in Bastogne. In Bastogne, you had Volksgrenadier regiments. Now, there were a couple of seasoned veterans. You had, for instance, the Panzer Lehr, who fought in Normandy. The Panzer Lehr were amazing when they were on full strength. By the time we got to Bastogne, there were 2/3 less than the actual strength. The 2nd Panzer Division, not SS, 2nd Panzer Division, they were also operating about 80% proof. So, these two Volksgrenadier divisions that they had there were not very, very good. Some haven't even had training. They've just been put into uniforms and pushed that way, So all this in this wonderful indestructibility of the Germans is bullshit. By 1944, by the end of 1944, they're no longer an indestructible enemy. They can be taken down. Now they've got the advantage in the centre that they've got a decent commander, Hasso von Manteuffel. Hasso von Manteuffel served with Rommel. He was a great linguist. He spoke perfect English, the man. And he had a good relationship with his subordinates, but it was a tenuous one. He had an objective to get to the River Meuse. He wasn't particularly bothered how he did it, but Bastogne didn't figure in his arrangements. That came later, So when we talk about the typical soldier, it's hard to talk about a typical soldier. If he's a Wehrmacht soldier, well, he could be one of the new recruits, or he could be one of the commanders from the other ones brought over to give them some inspiration. Or is it about the SS? Now, there you go again. Your SS. I mean, I met a lot of these guys. They were still staunch, dyed-in-the-blood Nazis. I can guarantee you that for a start. The 1st Division. The other divisions, not so much so. Like 12th Division, I met from the 12th Division. I met there's a lot of banging going on here. From the 12th Division, I met this wonderful guy called Hans Baumann in Stolberg in Aachen, who went to join the police force and was surreptitiously put into the 12th Division SS. And his boss was Rudy Ribbentrop. And of course, Ribbentrop, his father, was executed. And I've got 2 books here from Rudy. Yeah, he sent me 2 books of his. I sent him one of mine, and we talked to each other. I was the only person who he ever talked to on the phone. So it's the perception of a German, of an Allied soldier or a German soldier is a totally different thing, obviously. But in the German soldiers, it's even wider than that, you know?
Sure. Okay. So let's bring in a question from our audience. Mark Cool has asked a couple of questions, and I'll put his second one out there. They're both involving, your comments that the siege was never going to lead to an American surrender. And Mark says, Martin, how low was the ammunition stores by the time skies cleared and air resupply began? If the skies didn't clear and Patton didn't penetrate German lines, how long could it last? So that's his question from Mark.
That is a very good question, Mark. Well, the thing is, I think that they would have forced their way through eventually. But I remember talking to the guys from the 969th who were an artillery unit who claimed that they were down to the last few shells. But from the guys who were actually out in the fields, in the foxhole and stuff, I didn't hear of any huge problems. The biggest problems of supply they had was for medical supplies. That was a big problem because they were actually down to sterilizing wounds with cognac. And there was one amputation that took place in Bastogne, which was used with cognac and champagne. They had nothing. They were tearing up bed sheets. That was the big problem. And you see, this is why when the resupply came in, the parachutes were color coded. So you could say, that's medical supplies. That's military supplies over there. That's weapons over there. And you couldn't actually identify each set of paratroops because of that. But they were in a bad way, but they would have held on. There's no doubt about it. And we're now the 23rd when the Germans give the ultimatum. By the 26th, so 3 days later, Patton broke through. So once Patton had got through, the information highway was coming in, they were taking out wounded, they were bringing in supplies. So I think they would have managed it without. But someone must have mentioned that, there were certain items starting to run out. Now, for instance, they didn't run out of food in Bastogne because, the area around Bastogne is quite agricultural and you have a lot of farms around there. People in the south are good at storing food. They're experts, pickling and stuff like that, absolute experts. And the number of 101st Airborne guys who said to me, we shared a jar of gherkins, dill pickles with these people. They were lovely, They even had pickled meat. They survived, and they would have survived. But you see, I think at the time it must have seemed a bit drastic. But the Germans weren't getting it all their way either. They were having fuel shortages, fuel problems. So it was working both ways. This supply problem. Hope that answered your question, Mark. I'm pleased with myself.
So, Bart, you were talking about the Belgian civilians and feeding the GIs. And one of the things that I think is sort of interesting about this battle, of course, is that the civilians are there for much of it, right? They don't get a chance to bug out. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the civilians in Bastogne and what their battle was all about.
Well, there would have been originally around 9,000 people in Bastogne. It was a small a small farming town. They used to have a week, a Saturday every week, where they used to bring their livestock to market and things. And it'd gone on pretty much as it had done for hundreds and hundreds of years, with the addition of motorized transport, of course. But it's on a plateau. where 7 roads converge. So obviously it would become a natural place to orientate to at weekends, And so it was a very healthy, happy little community. But Belgium was no stranger to war. So in 1914, the Germans invaded. In August 1914, the Germans came over the border and they came through Bastogne. Now, on that particular occasion, there was hardly any fighting. But the second time they came over in 1940, there was fighting, because that barracks where Tony McAuliffe was running his show, that was the Belgian army barracks from the chasseurs. The chasseurs were a kind of an engineer unit, and they did actually effectively stop the Germans and hold them back for a little while, only a little while. They only had a small force. But they were not, the people of Bastogne. I mean, I don't doubt for a second they were terrified at the prospect, but they definitely didn't. They definitely didn't show it. I mean, the people I spoke to who stayed in Bastogne during that time, they all have nothing but praise for the American soldiers. And you think sometimes, come on, is it just one guy or is it a couple of guys who are a bit nice, But no, all of them were excellent, according to them. So you kind of forged an esprit de corps between the people of Bastogne and the U.S. Army and the American people, which is an unbreakable bond. And it's still that today. Now, what you had in 1944, in September, Bastogne, on September the 8th, Bastogne had been liberated by the 28th Division and the Pennsylvania National Guard. And they were basically hanging around Bastogne. They weren't doing much. They were more situated towards the Luxembourg border, but they were having a pretty good time there. Very popular with the ladies, maybe a little too popular for some people. Horizontal, what they called it back in the day. Yeah. They called it horizontal collaboration.
Yes.
Yeah. A wonderful expression. But yeah, they were popular with them. And of course, these guys, you had 4 years of these miserable swines, and all of a sudden these guys come along and they've got the nylons and the chocolates, they've got everything with them. And they're very, very popular. Absolutely they are. But when the first rumbles occurred on 5:30 in the morning on December 16th, the people in Bastogne were not too troubled by it, but they could hear it. There's no doubt that they could hear it. And as the days progressed, in fact, 2 days later, on the 18th of December, a shell landed outside St. Peter's Church in Bastogne, and that was the first one. And that was the sort of, come on, I think it might be a good idea to get out west a bit. So some did. In fact, there were over 3,000 still left in Bastogne, living in the cellars. And they'd established communal cellars as they'd done before. You see, this is the Bastogne people, the Bastognards, as they like to be called. This is the Bastogne people basically acting on their instincts of saying, yeah, well, when we get attacked, we go and hide under that house, or that parochial hall or whatever. And that's what it was about. So they were left with about 3,000 in the city, and they shared up everything with the Americans, what they had there. Now, for instance, no Americans had been issued winter clothing or even rain clothing. Do you know, the quartermaster at SHAAF Shafe, the quartermaster, he actually refused to allow winter clothing and wet weather clothing to leave the premises because it's going to be over by Christmas. That's a new one for you. And he decreed that. So they had no winter clothing. So when the guys arrive in Bastogne, they're frozen stupid, and they're literally throwing blankets over themselves. And this is what they were getting from the local population. They said, hey, go on, have a blanket. They were putting helmets. They were putting pillowcases over their helmets. Everything that would work. And this, again, coming back to what I said a few minutes ago about this capacity for improvisation. this is when it comes into play, because they've got nothing to play with, and the people of Bastogne say, well, yeah, come on, you can have one of these, and you do not make a bond, a friendship like that goes over in 100 years. It's going to be for hundreds of years. I have spoken. Yeah, so that's basically what it was. You know, there was an esprit de corps, there was a friendship. The friendship has been passed down to other generations in the same family, and the things I've had given to me when I've been in Bastogne, I've had a woman come up to me and she gave me a gold watch. I said, why do you want to give me a gold watch? She said, because you're a soldier. I said, I'm not a soldier. He's a soldier. And I pointed to a guy, a veteran who was visiting, and she gave it to him. But you see, that indicates how eager they are to please Americans when they come to Bastogne. And that's still the case today. And I think that's wonderful.
So, Martin, you're getting older, but I'm not mistaking you yet for a World War II veteran. So
Oh, you have no idea.
You're doing okay. Hey, look, you have visited Bastogne frequently. You've gone there with veterans. You've gone there with other groups of people, and you've been doing this for a long time, 20 or 30 years. So I'm wondering, over that time, we can draw on you to tell us, how has the memory of the battle changed? The way it's remembered, the physical landscape, the attitude of the people of Bastogne, and on top of that, what happens when the veterans are gone, as they almost are now?
Inevitably are, absolutely. Yes, good question, mate. Well, the thing is, your perception changes considerably over the years. I mean, for instance, some people would base their total experience of Bastogne on the TV series Band of Brothers, you know. I think that's what happened. That's definitely what happened, because Stephen Ambrose said it happened. And no disrespect intended to Mr. Ambrose, but it didn't exactly happen as he said. For instance, you know, the Lieutenant Spears, who charged across the field and, you know, ran through he sued, and not Ambrose. He did take out a legal case against it, you know. But the thing is, it's not important. What's important is that people still have an interest and they still have a want to come back to Bastogne, but for the right reasons. Bastogne was established because of war, but it was sold because of friendship in many respects, you know. And I think my own perception about that has changed, considerably, because, I mean, you get told first, so what happened in Bastogne? Well, the Germans attacked, but they didn't have enough men, so the Americans won, and then they pushed them back. Right, that's it. That's your lot. Then, and it's not only when I started to really research Bastogne. I mean, I started it with 5 books ago with the Tigers of Bastogne. Then I started to think, then hang on a second, this wasn't as straightforward as what they make out. The other things have happened here, and this is definitely not the it's not the end of days, you know. I have changed my opinion completely based on veterans' accounts. Now, I had this guy, I was doing a TV show a few weeks ago in America, and this guy said, yeah, but you know, man, you don't know everything, you're a historian. Of course I don't know bloody everything. I'm not supposed to know everything. But he started giving me a hard time about it, and I thought, okay, fine, I'll have you for breakfast, sunshine. And never been one to back down from a fight. Come on, get a load of, hey, do you want some? And this guy is sort of saying to me, you don't know everything, and you know, it could have been like this, it could have been like that. I said, well, look, that's the wonderful thing about history, is that you can speculate, but when you do have all the facts together, put them out there, you know, share them out there. And this is what's happened with me, is that I've discovered things about soldiers and about units, which, I mean, I've always thought they were good, but not that good. You know, and they really were that good, and that's the thing about it with the 101st Airborne. You know, they were put into a very difficult situation. They stepped up to the plate that did the job, and so my opinion has changed completely. And you get these guides. I mean, I've guided for various companies here and there. I don't particularly like it, to tell you the truth, but I have done it up to and including Stephen Ambrose. But I prefer being on the field. I believe in being there in the field, talking to people, meeting people. Because, I'll give you an example, right? We met some people in Bastogne who were 101, 102, 103 years old. Just last year, I was walking around a place called Meyer Road, which is in the east of Belgium. And there was this old man sweeping the floor. And turned out he was a former SS man from the 12th Division SS. And I had a great conversation with the guy. I speak perfectly good German and French and Dutch. And so I had a perfectly good conversation with the guy. And I recorded the conversation. But would you believe this? You see, that's Belgium. You see, this is a country that has known 2,000 years of conflict. You don't have to look too far in this country to find evidence of a battle, I am enjoying this whiskey, guys.
Martin King,
lovely.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Martin.
About your book, The Eagles of Bastone, the untold story of the heroic defense of a city under siege.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming, sharing a whiskey, sharing some stories, and chatting with our audience about that.
Anytime, Rick. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure and an honor to spend some time with you. And I digress. It's the end of Sunday, and I've been in the pub most afternoon. But somebody got to fly the flag,
Absolutely.
It's a hard job, but somebody got to do it.
So, Chris, thank you so much for doing that. And you take care, okay?
Thank you very much, Rick.
All right.
God bless you, my friend. Take care.
Take care, guys.
I'm out of here, man. I'm traveling.
Bye-bye. Okay, Chris. Yes, you were accused of being quiet during this interview. I didn't think you were that quiet.
Was I quiet?
You were in there answering questions. I mean, you weren't answering them. You were asking them and putting it forward there. Well done. Next week, we continue on with World War II.
This whole live thing.
It's a big war. And
is it?
There were a lot of parts of it.
Really? Okay.
And a lot of different people involved.
Okay.
So next week, we're going to have the story of E Company of the 141st Infantry, which was the only all Mexican-American Army unit in World War II, at least until they got to the Rapido River. And we'll be talking with author Dave Gutierrez, who has written the book Patriots from the Barrio. And I met Dave at a World War II conference a month or two ago. I really liked him. Looking forward to having him on the show and submitting him. You won't be quiet, right? You'll be in there pitching.
No, I'm looking forward to it. It's a very interesting topic. I'm as some of you know, I'm doing a VE Day tour in May, and as part of the research for that, I was researching all black platoons that were integrated with white companies, which is another kind of along those lines, just kind of an unusual story that you don't hear about. So when you brought up this book, I thought, that would be very
I think it should be fun, something different, and and we'll continue, and you will just keep on being live. Who knows? Maybe forever. I don't know if we'll ever. Yeah.
Well, no, I go to the Pacific in March, and I'm not getting up at 3:00 in the morning to do.
Oh, Chris! Well, are you committed? After 5 years, are you committed or not to History Happy Hour?
I'll have my hologram take over.
Your AI. Oh, Chris Anderson AI. It's just like the real Chris Anderson, only
younger and thinner.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we could have two AI hosts.
There you go.
Who just yeah. I think this is not an AI show.
Probably not.
I don't think that's a good vibe for us.
Probably not a good look.
Guys, please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, shout at us on Blue Sky, because we are leaving X behind. Listen to our podcast, back us on Patreon, and browse historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.